Here's a question that might ruffle some feathers. Would it have been better for Cedar Fair to declare bankruptcy rather than merge with Six Flags? That's a great question. Alongside Ryan Sir, I'm Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics.
Tower Topics is a podcast by Kings Island fans for Kings Island fans, because that's who we are and that's who we care about. Let's kick this off by thanking our Prestige members. Thank you so much, Miss Mandy, 1983, Lil Mac, 21, Brian Hauser, 330T, Logan Lipper, Aaron Bort, Jacob Fix, Damon Barnes, Stephen Horneck, Eric Grau, Ian Crawford, Dustin Jackson, Songstress Miku, Dakota Cole, Lack Gray, Galaxy B-Boy, and Medic 302. Thank you guys so much for supporting Tower Topics at the highest level. That's the prestige level. If you want to be involved in Tower Topics, there's a link in the description. Members get early access to the content, exclusive videos, exclusive live streams, and hey, some tiers you can get some free stuff.
So Ryan, to get things started, kind of detail for our audience, why in the first place that Cedar Fair did the merger with Six Flags, what the other options, might have been, including bankruptcy. So kind of go over that for our listeners so we can kind of paint the picture of why that happened and, what the ramifications would have been had they not done that.
Yeah, so I want to clarify right off the bat. This is all subjective. I don't have a crystal ball or anything like that, but I think that coming out the other side of this in 5 years, Cedar Fair probably would have been able to weather it. Six Flags probably not so much. But at the same time, it was going to be tough times no matter what. So let's say that the merger didn't happen. Cedar Fair gets to the point where they can't make their debts. Their debt is, they extended all their credit limits. They're unable to pay. They have to file bankruptcy. So as you know, there's two types of bankruptcies. The one that they would have filed is Chapter 11. Chapter 11 is reorganization of debt. And the simplest way to put it is you're exchanging equity in the company for debt. In a lot of cases, I don't know how it would work with the limited partner units. That might throw a monkey wrench into this. I'm not sure. But typically, everybody that has stock just loses it. It becomes worthless. They reissue stock. The debt holders are the ones that are able to recoup some of their investment by owning huge swaths of the company. So with that being said, if let's say that it was a couple years in the future, they're facing down possible bankruptcy, would things look different now at Kings Island than they do with the merger right now? Probably not. You'd probably see mass layoffs, cost cutting, dirty parks, understaffing, all that stuff. That's all indicative of the covenants they have to reach in order to reorganize this debt. So it's regardless of what outcome we have from this conversation of merger or bankruptcy, a lot of it is like pick your poison.
Right. Now, let me ask you this though. So the safer route is to do what they did and merge.
Right.
But in terms of being an investor, Nat, if they had declared bankruptcy, I mean, that's a big problem too, because you start to, the investors lose trust, when something like that happens too. So it was almost like you said, pick your poison.
Right. They don't just lose trust. They literally lose their shares more often than not. The first time, so for an individual investor like you or I, we've got $1,000 in Cedar Fair stock. You probably just lose it. It just goes down to zero. Hopefully you sold it before that. For institutional investors, your teachers' retirement plan, stuff like that, sometimes they like insure their stock. I've heard that. I don't know much about it. But with that being said, you often see lawsuits from these like retirement Chicago Teachers Retirement Fund, which has a $30 million stake in the company. They're not happy with how it's run, so they file a lawsuit and stuff. That's where it's kind of like you're picking up the pieces and stuff. From a guest standpoint, it would be difficult for a little while. Ultimately, they come out the other side potentially stronger. But right. With that being said, this was an opportunity for Cedar Fair to take the risk and double the size of the company. They're able to get Six Flags for, it was just a merger of equals, which is never a thing. But, Six Flags shareholders got 49% of the company along with some sort of cash dividend. And then Cedar Fair got 51, and a lot of the senior management was the ones that stepped in. A lot of good talent came from Six Flags. A lot of the top talent came from Cedar Fair. But I think that it's more evident now than ever that this is Cedar Fair taking over. I know down the chain that there's a lot of Six Flags people, but when it comes down to CEO, COO, and so on, that's Cedar Fair people, and that's a positive because remember the parks were run very well under them.
Yeah, and that's one of the concerns a lot of park goers had was what the Cedar Fair parks were known for. They were known for being clean. They were known for great guest service, great operations. Six Flags, on the other hand, outside of a park or two, over the past decade or so, not so much. They were seen as being run down, understaffed,
Right.
Rides broken down all the time, not a lot of trust there. So I think that was a lot of the concern that a lot of people had. And then we get into the season and we are seeing things at the Legacy Cedar Fair parks that hadn't really been seen before. You're seeing the minimal staffing, you're seeing trash cans overflowing, you're seeing the tables being a mess. Good luck finding a table sometimes. The minimal staffing on the rides, increasing the wait times. At some parks, not Kings Island, but at some parks we're seeing, instead of a 3 train operation, it's 2. Instead of 2, it's 1 some places. So different things like that. So it's looking more like a Six Flags park when from the guest perspective. So that's not a good thing. But you would think, though, we knew that it was going to be tough times for the next 2 or 3 years, right, Ryan?
Right. Synergies. Now, to clarify as to why, I feel like we've hit on this, but if you don't watch every episode, you may not understand why they did this. And we talk about cost synergies, and you and I throw that around very incorrectly. When we talk about, there's only 2 people running the beast, cost synergies. The trash cans are overflowing, cost synergy. That's obviously not what a cost synergy is.
Not exactly.
No.
It's part of the overall picture, though.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think that's what they were getting at. I think the cost synergies that they were aiming for involved, more buying power with Coke. Being able to buy 5 Zamperla rides in a year so they get a 15% discount.
Right.
Stuff like that is where they were supposed to set.
Yeah, some of the other things they talked about too, that was just overhead too, redundancy of positions. Things like that fell under the cost synergies.
Oh, absolutely. But you got to remember that when they talk about that, I don't think they're necessarily saying like, well, now that we're merged, we can get rid of these 3 ride operations people. I think it's more like,
no, not that. Yeah, you're
like,
right.
we don't need 2 CFOs. We don't need, we can combine these 2 regions together, stuff like that. That's where like some of the overhead was going to come from. But ultimately, coming out the other side, assuming this is successful, the buying power is going to be incredible. And they're going to have a lot of power in North America. They're going to be, by far the biggest chain. Hershey crept up from behind a little bit, but that's still like nothing compared to this. So they're going to be able to get whatever they want.
Yeah, my biggest concern, Ryan, and it's not just mine, it's other people that very familiar with Cedar Fair, was when they were doing these cuts and letting people go, general managers, park presidents, people in operations, people in food service, people in the corporate office, and that a lot of really good, talented people who made a difference were being shown the door, no fault of their own. And then as you go through these rough times, and then it starts to they have that reset, what they're hoping for in 2028, you don't have those people anymore. You've lost so much institutional knowledge, so it's going to take longer than 2 or 3 years to rebuild your talent pool and have that expertise, that institutional knowledge that you've lost during this past 4, 5, 6 months.
Yeah, and it's going to, will they ever recover from that? There's going to be a little part of the park, of all the parks, that is lost when, the employee that's been around for 45 years is just all of a sudden gone.
Yeah, I
it's
mean, a lot of 22, 23-year-olds have talent. They just don't have that institutional knowledge or anything. They didn't grow up working in the park, necessarily coming from the outside at that young age. And it shows, that there's just a difference now, with the people that are in place than there was 2, 3, 5 years ago.
Yeah. Now there's two possibilities with this. One could be that you get this whole class of people that are raised with the whole let's see how far we can get away with not doing trash cans, or let's see how many years we can go without adding a ride before people say anything, or let's see how small we can make the portion. Like there is going to be a whole class of people that kind of grow up in that. But also it's possible that you're going to get some people that learn to do a lot on a little. you know
Yes, that's not a bad thing necessarily. I've had experiences in places I've worked where you had a shoestring budget and you had to wear a lot of hats and you had to turn $1 into like $20 compared
yeah.
to what somebody else had. There would be different levels of, you know, companies up here had this, companies had there, and then the other ones you're way down here. So I've been there too, where you had to make the dollar stretch in that, and that's not a bad thing because I think even when I went to Kings Island, that it made me a little more resourceful. Even though I had the resources, I didn't need the resources because I knew how to make things stretch in that. So that's not a bad thing, Ryan. That's a good point that you mentioned.
Yeah, and and from a business continuity standpoint, it's the merger probably was the safer option. For Six Flags was probably the only option. Um, from a fan perspective, though, uh, I mean, in a matter of a week, we lost a lot of institutional knowledge.
You
We
did.
lost a lot of people that care a lot. We lost a lot of people that have seen the ins and outs. A lot of people that get it. And that, frankly, is what scares me a little bit.
Yeah. I'm on the same page with that. I have a hard time, just knowing that how many really good people, were shown the door. Again, no fault of their own. And you're seeing, just the experience in the park. It's not the same for a lot of guests on the Legacy Cedar Fair parks just because they're seeing, minimal staffing, throughout the park. You picked a department, it's not staffed the way it was. And that does come back and it does impact the guest experience. I think that part is being overlooked, I believe, in Charlotte, the corporate office. I think they figure, no, they're still going to see us as a good value. They're still going to see us as something they do every summer. We can get away with that. That so the table was a mess, or so the trash cans were overflowing, or so it took them a little longer to get on the beast. They're still going to buy their season pass when it goes on sale. And to a degree, they're right. There will be a lot of people that still do that. But this is the first time I've seen as much negative sentiment about Kings Island, that there's been, and it's all around those same kind of things. The staffing, the park being a mess, um, just the different vibe in the park, the morale not being there. With the associates not being as excited about their jobs and things, and that does eventually catch up with you. And I hope that that doesn't drag into next season and beyond, because if it does, that's they're not going to be able to have that successful reset that they're looking for in 2028 if the guests start losing confidence. They start finding other things to do. you know um, there's a number of people that have, they would visit 70, 80, 90 times a year at Kings Island, and here we are at the end of June and they've been there maybe 5 or 6 times this year just because they just haven't been impressed with the way the park's being run. That's got to be a concern, because the more and more people there are that are only visiting a fraction of what they did, the more likely they might choose to do something else next year with their money and not buy a season pass.
Yeah, I mean, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. They're under the Kings Island's a mispenetrated park. They're going to come back no matter what, and we can do this, and they'll still come back, and then we can do that, and they'll
The
still come back.
loyalty is there from the guests. Kings Island has, a very loyal, passionate following, but as soon as they start to feel that that loyalty is not being returned, that's when they're going to have a problem. And it's getting close to that point because like I said, you're seeing negative sentiment that you never did before. And some of the park's biggest cheerleaders, are leading that charge of the negativity. And I never thought I would see that with some of the people.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say the people keep on coming back until one day they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And if I think that in a lot of cases people will buy their passes no matter what, but I'm not sure from a business standpoint if after you buy your pass, if they if they want you to visit, because it seems like you're kind of seen as a burden once you buy your pass, which I understand that you give them money and then you're an expense. But I know people that would buy the meal plan every year, and this year they said, you know what, we're just not going to do that. It's not good. I still think it's worth it, but
Oh, it's definitely worth it. I mean,
but there are people out there that have opted not to, or I know people that bringing back your whole argument about the ice, and they're like, if I can't get a Coke with ice, I'm just not going to get the drink plan. I'll drink water. And all it takes is that sentiment to be widespread.
yeah. Or I bought the drink plan and I couldn't get a cup.
Yeah, where all the drink stands were closed. We saw that thing that somebody in guest services showed somebody, which I assume they weren't supposed to show it to them, and they took a picture of it that said, "These are the things that are going to be closed." Like, I guess it was Sunday through Thursday.
During the week, during the week,
all freestyles, tower drinks, French corner,
pig pens.
Yeah, I'm glad they
that's
built
the thing
that.
I don't like is seeing things dark, and we're going to see the theaters dark soon because like the Bubble Show, Kings Island, it's only there till July 6th. The rest of the summer, that's out. The Stunt Show, early August, I think it's August 3rd or something, is its last day. So it doesn't have a deep run either. So there's just a lot of things like that catches up with you because not everybody's a ride person. Not everybody's going to go to Soak City. Not everyone has young kids. Some of them come to the park specifically for the entertainment offerings, and when there's going to be a lot of those dark days that there were earlier in the season, and there's going to be from mid-August on, that impacts the attendance too.
Yeah, a time when mid-August on, when people really would want to be indoors, is going to be when they have their theaters dark. So
yeah. So our question, though, for our listeners, though, is what do you think? Here we are, we're midsummer. You've had your taste of Kings Island being a Six Flags park. What's your thoughts? Are you do you agree? Was the merger the right thing to do? Would you have rather them not have done that? And what some of the alternative or some of the ramifications of that? Let us know in the comments what your thoughts have been, so far as we're midway through the summer.
Yeah. Would you pick your poison? Would you rather head the rocky road of potential bankruptcy or the rocky road of cost synergies? That's for you.
Yeah, there are no other. Yeah, that's your picks. You only have those two options. It wasn't going to be a nice rosy summer. There was going to be some rough points either way.
Yeah. We'll be right back with some hot takes. Okay, so we all know Richard Zimmerman, that guy. Well, he's been getting a lot of heat recently, and I'm starting to wonder if it's justified. Okay, we can all agree that closing a major ride like Kingda Ka without an official announcement was a misstep. But what about the other layoffs, ride closures, or even the park closures, Six Flags America? So when the two companies merged, they sold the equity holders on $150 million in cost synergies. Zimmerman just didn't make this number up. Everything from rides to straws was going to be cheaper if you increase the buying power. And as it stands now, it doesn't appear as though this lofty goal was going to be able to be achieved by normal means. When they announced these cost synergies, they likely didn't have layoffs of the general managers or overflowing trash cans in mind. Whether you like it or not, the shareholders were promised a bigger, stronger company on the other side of this merger. Zimmerman needs to fulfill the obligations he made. He isn't cutting staff because he dislikes the parks. He's acting out of desperation and doing what nearly anyone would do in his position. Guests have the right to be disgruntled, and in a lot of cases, they should. But going online and complaining about the CEO doesn't move the needle. Your voting ballot's your credit card, and your feet are your standing army. People often say that they're doing this to appease the shareholders, but companies have three obligations: obligations to their shareholders, obligations to the employees, and obligations to its customers. In many instances, one is not important than the other two, but the loudest typically wins. So just remember, you've got your vote and you've got your army.
Let's move on to take. That's a nice take, Ryan. And I think you are right that he does get a lot of unfair criticism. I think if you were in that position, and you knew who you really answered to, you'd be making the same moves that Six Flags has done this year.
It's a man that's working out of desperation. Don, let's move on to a segment we like to call Buy or Sell.
All right, Ryan, for this buy or sell, we've got the floral clock. It's been something at Kings Island since 1972. It's iconic, but it has been broken all year. So obviously, with it being the end of June, Six Flags doesn't want to put the money into fixing it. That's the way it appears right now. And with that being the case, the floral clock will be removed before the start of the 2026 season.
Sell. They can't get away with that. They know it. They know they can't get away with that. People love that thing. They'd rather wait for it to be repaired than just have it removed. If they remove the floral clock, they would hear about it every day for the end of time.
I'm going to sell too. I don't see that going away. I think they would remove a ride before they'd remove the floral clock.
I think that's quite possible. I think the ride behind it will go before the floral clock does, and rightfully so. The floral clock is incredibly important, and it truly is. It's part of the
iconic.
park.
Yeah, it's iconic. It's an attraction in the in the action there. It's it's one of the most photographed things in the park. So yeah, I think it stays. I definitely think that's a sell.
Yeah. We'll be right back with some theme park headline news. All right. So, Six Flags officials have raised the possibility that California's Great America could close after the 2027 season as the countdown to extinction continues for this Northern California amusement park. During a recent investor meeting, Six Flags Chief Financial Officer Brian Withrow confirmed that the park's future hinges on whether the company extends its lease for the Santa Clara property. Said Withrow, unless we decide to exercise one of our options to extend the lease, the park's last season will be 2027. And if it extends beyond 2027, I'll eat my hat.
Yeah, I would be very surprised if it does. There were some that thought this was going to be the last year.
I was one of those people.
Yeah, it does look like it's going to at least be around for 2 more years. If you haven't a chance to get there yet, definitely check it out.
No.
It's a beautiful park, so visit while you can.
Yeah, same with Six Flags America. That one, You've only got a couple months left.
That's right.
Okay. We'll be right back with the listener questions. First listener question, Greg from Mainville. So we love the podcast. Yesterday, the family and I were at Soak City. My stepson loves the wave pools. He wanted to know how Kings Island makes the waves. I told him that will be a good question for Don and Ryan. How does Kings Island make the waves? FYI, I did notice 3 workers collecting garbage. I did see one overthrowing garbage can by the parking lot. I did see a worker pushing a cart full of Home City ice bags. I do hope Kings Island does not become a second-rate park. I have been coming to Kings Island since 1973. Take care. How do they make the waves, Don?
Well, that's a good question. No, when you look at the 2 wave pools that Kings Island has at the very back of it, there's like things behind it, the machines and that will start the waves, and then it just kind of takes off from there. But I don't know if it's fan driven or it's something like that back there, but it's done from the back side of it, and that they've got these big units back there that make the waves.
The one at the beach uses compressed air.
Yeah, it's compressed air, like with the machines and that'll push that through.
So what it does is it creates like a pocket of air in the catacomb. So those things that are netted off in the front, they're catacombs. They're gated off and everything, but if the gates weren't there, you could like go inside them, and they're about 10 feet tall.
Yeah.
So my understanding is the way that it works is that you push air into those things, and it kind of has like a respiratory thing where it breathes in and out.
Yeah. Kind of like the motion gets it going, and you can see that from the wall where it's starting. It's just a little bit at a time as it's pushing out further and further, and then it just becomes more widespread throughout the wave pool. But yeah, if you're there, kind of walk down to the side of it and kind of get to where you can kind of see, to the side of the back wall and a little bit behind it, you can kind of see where those compressors and things are.
Yeah. Don, you completely missed the opportunity. They said, how does Kings Island make the waves? You're supposed to say with a proper PR campaign. That's how it makes waves.
Yeah, true.
All right. Kendra from Middletown, Ohio. She said, Don, I don't know if you remember me or not. I used to work at Kings Island for many years. Started in landscaping back when I was CBS, or when it was CBS. Oh, CBS, like the parent company.
The
Okay.
parent company, right?
Worked full time all the way up until mid Cedar Fair. Was not considered a full timer, but worked year round, taking a week off here and there. My sister told me about your guys' YouTube page and said I must check it out. I agree with your point of view that a lot of how the park has changed over the years. My question is, do you ever do a podcast show on behind the scenes running of Kings Island? I truly miss the days working around the best group of people in maintenance. From when I started, I worked my way up to becoming a supervisor in landscaping and helping other maintenance departments. I also helped run the tool crib the last few years I was there. We truly were a team. I even remember helping out in the front gate back in the day when security was low on personnel. I could go on with so many stories, but that would be too long of a message to send. It would be interesting to see a segment on maintenance teams behind the scenes also.
Yeah, we'd love to do those kind of episodes. I know what the maintenance teams do in the off season and that to keep the rides, ready for the next season, the day to day every morning, what they do. So we could certainly do an episode that details that. I think that would be of interest to our listeners. In terms of getting somebody from the park to come on and talk about that from maintenance or whatever, we have our challenges with being able to do that. But there is enough knowledge, information there. I saw it firsthand every day, the different things that they would do every morning before the park opened. What every single ride had to go through. So yeah, that's something that I think would be of interest to our listeners, and we'll certainly do an episode on that. So thanks for recommending that. And yes, I do remember you, Kendra.
Awesome. Yeah, it seems like landscaping and I mean CB. Well, okay, so if she was back when it was CBS, was that exclusively 2005 ish thing? Because it was only about a year that
Yeah,
CBS.
I definitely remember her my early years with Kings Island, being in landscaping and that. So um, yeah, we definitely crossed paths. But yeah, I appreciate the suggestion, and we'll certainly look into doing that. And I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy those episodes.
All right, Austin from Whereabouts Unknown said, "Hey guys, do y'all know about a possible food policy change? The last time I was at the park on May 15th, I bought an insulated food bag at Soak City, and the employee at checkout said we could use that bag to bring outside food into Soak City. He said that any bag would be allowed as long as it's insulated."
I've not heard that they've changed that policy, and I don't see why they would, because they would want every possible sale that they could get of food, and that would be something I would think that they would have put out there on their website, in the FAQs and that you can bring in your own food and that. So I don't think that that's a change. I just think that just somebody that might have been new and not really informed about what all the policies were at that point.
Yeah, because I remember the big difference and the reason why my family went to Americana instead of Kings Island was that you could bring your own food because they didn't want to pay for food.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this has been, it's not like it's a new policy and it's not going over well. It's a 50 something year old policy that still doesn't go over well.
Right.
But I really doubt it.
Yeah, I think in the FAQs it still says that you cannot bring in, outside food and beverages are not permitted. You can't bring in coolers or anything like that. So
now I wish you could bring, I understand why you can't, but I wish you could bring in outside drinks because sometimes I'll have like a Starbucks in my hand or like a can of Coke or something. And I mean, you can take it through security, but you can't.
You got to finish it before you get your scanned at the gate.
Right. So I wish you could do that at a lot of the other parks. You can. A lot of the other parks, as in Disney and Universal, the Six Flags parks, you can't. But that would be nice to be able to do that. But you're asking for somebody to, this is just orange juice. Actually, it's a screwdriver. So I can understand why they don't have that rule. Kevin from Ohio said, "Is David Bellamy still frozen?"
I think that goes back. Oh, remember we had the panel?
We had the panel, and
the panel. Yeah, he was frozen. Every time we would throw it to him, he was frozen.
Yeah. Last I heard, he was still frozen with Walt Disney under Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. I don't know. No, that was a hard night because David would have had a lot to add to the conversation, but he was always frozen on the screen. But Thanks for reminding us, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up that tearing open that scab. I
That's
appreciate
right.
it, Kevin. All right. If you've got your own questions, send them to Don, not me. Don Helbig at
Why would they
themeperksbydon.
send it to me?
Because you actually do this. People sometimes send me questions and they don't get answered because I'm not good at this. I'm the guy that talks a lot, and you're the secretary. We've established this.
That's right.
But
So yeah,
so administrative assistant. Sorry. So Don Helbig at themeperksbydon.com. If you'd prefer to send it to RX, then just send us a direct message at tower_topics. Your first name, city you're from, and your question, comment, concern. We'd love to hear from you. Don, tell them about the t-shirts.
Tower Topics t-shirts, very popular item. They come in any size you want. Kind of a wicked green color, we're calling it. If you're interested in one, $22. That includes the shipping. You can send me an email. Just put Tower Topics t-shirts or TT in the subject line, and in there put your full name, your mailing address, what size shirt you need. I'll send you the QR code, and then we'll get the shirts out to you as quick as possible. They usually come within a matter of days, but we have more. We have other items that people are finding that they really like, and that's stickers. They're vinyl stickers, and they come in a couple of different sizes. This price is going to include your shipping now. Okay, so they're 4.5 inch by 3 inch. Those are $5 each. These are the kinds you'd want to put on like water bottles, tumblers, maybe coffee mugs, anything like that. And then we've got the 6.5 inch by 4 inch. Those are $7 each. These are really ideal for like car windows. So if you want a sticker, same address, same thing. The shipping all included. So yeah, get a shirt, get a sticker, just let us know, and we'll get you that QR code. And once the transaction goes through, we'll get those items to you fast.
Yeah. While you're there, make sure that you follow us on X at Tower_Topics. It's a great place to be. And search for us if you're on Facebook for the Tower Topics Facebook group. We always post a lot of good information there. Don posts historical things. If we got new products coming out, we post it in there. Really friendly, accommodating. So we'd love to see that. I'm Ryan Sir, along with Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics.